Hello, Peter for Sun90 here at Sirus, and welcome to my retro review of Fire Emblem, Seisen no Keifu, or Genealogy of the Holy Wars. Well, being such a huge fan of the Fire Emblem series in general, having played Fire Emblem Seal Swords, Blazing Sword, Sacred Stones, Path of Radiance, Ray of Dawn, and Shadow Dragon, I knew I had to give Genealogy a try out since it's so well regarded in the fandom. And man, is this game pretty different from 6 and onwards. But it also has things that are pretty much stable in the series as well. All in all, I have to say that I'm glad to have given Genealogy of the Holy Wars a try out, and I can see why this game is so well regarded in the fandom. But the ultimate question is, does it hold up? Well, that's what this review will go into, so without further delay, let's begin. Fire Emblem Seisen no Keifu, or Genealogy of the Holy Wars, is an srpg that was developed by Intelligent System and published by Nintendo. It was released in 1996 in Japan for the Super Famicom, which is basically the Japanese version of the SNES, but unfortunately never got released outside of Japan. Graphically, I have to say the game have aged considerably well. The game uses 2D sprites as most, if not all, SNES/Famicom game uses. But unlike the GBA games, it tries to go for a more realistic look than the cartoony look of the GBA games, with the amount of detail you can see in the character sprites when they're in battle animations. And even the backdrops in the battle animations got a good amount of detail in them as well, which makes them pretty appealing to look at. Each weapon in the game also got their own unique models, which is pretty nice. The color scheme in this game is also pretty good, with both being nice to look at, and being able to identify your character individual models. The character art is also pretty nice. Battle animations are also pretty good. They're not as flashy as the GBA games, but they still look nice and does the job well. Though you can also turn off the battle animations in the menu screen and implement the map animation attacks, which will make the game go considerably faster. All in all, the visuals of Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy Wars have aged pretty gracefully, and are still nice to look at. Story-wise, I say it's great. Well, from fan translation, since I don't really know Japanese, so yeah. The story takes place in the continent of Judoro, which is split into 5 countries, which are Granbell, Isaac, Celestia, Verdane, and Austria, which was founded by the 12 Crusaders who defeated the Loud Empire in the Holy War. This information is sold just at the start of the game. The game officially takes place when the country of Isaac suddenly attacks Granbell. As a response to the attack, Granbell musters forces to repel from the Isaac forces. But just as Granbell is rebelling Isaac, Verdane suddenly attacks its back by attacking Jungbi, which is one of the duchy of the kingdom of Granbell. You play as Sigrid, who is the son of the duke who rules another duchy called Keifu. I think that's how you pronounce it. Which is just nearby Jungbi. After hearing that Jungbi was attacked, he rushes to go to Jungbi's aid in the intent of repelling the Verdane forces and rescuing his childhood friend, Aideen, who has been entrusted the protection of the area by her father, Lord Ring. And thus begins the tale of Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy Wars. Overall, the story holds up very well, and is still very entertaining and endearing to go through. The story is very grand, with it not only involving the entire continent in the story, but also spanning throughout decades when you are playing as Sigrid's son in the 2nd generation story. The overlying story is basically a political intrigue kind of plot, as you see various dukes and individuals throughout the 5 kingdoms try to get more power influence, and seeing how Sigrid deal with the various schemes of many individuals is pretty interesting and compelling. Well, that's mostly the 1st generation story. The 2nd generation story basically deals with what happens in the aftermath of the political manipulation of the 1st generation, and how the descendants of Sigrid and his party deal with the basic victor of the political manipulation of the 1st gen story. The overall story is also very immersive, with the game showing you the plot of the gameplay in terms of how the various generals and dukes send out the army within the game map itself. And it really helps that the map that the game uses is enormous, large enough that it's believable that the map is supposed to represent a whole country. But not only with enemy units, but with also neutral units with how they move, how even neutral units will turn to enemy units later on when you're going through the game. Or also how neutral units will be on your side attacking enemy units, but won't sometimes emerge victorious, which really create powerful scenes in the game. Overall, the story is interesting, compelling, and very grand, both how it involves all the countries and how long the story takes place, but also with how it shows the plot in the gameplay with troop movement and placement. The story also got a good amount of plot twists to keep you engaged, with Chapter 5 plot twist being the most memorable plot twist I've played in a video game. Seriously, Chapter 5, total game changer. But do note one thing, you might need to find English script for the ending of the game, since it seems that there's really no English patch that translates the ending. I will post a link to one script on Sirus.net, which is basically the go-to site if you're a Fire Emblem fan. But yeah, just a heads up. Characters are also pretty good. The villains are great, with them being interesting, and got pretty interesting motivations and backstories for what they're doing. The main characters are also pretty good, but they're probably not as fleshed out as some of the other characters in the series in the later games, since there's really no support conversation to expand on their characters. But the amount of dialogue they do have still make them pretty unique individuals in the story, and you can also trigger various dialogues between party members when you're playing through the game. And the marriage system in this game also fleshes the character personality more. Well, in terms of the final chapter of both first generation and second generation story. Now, for the next part, I usually talk about the script of the game. Well, concerning a game that doesn't have voice acting. But this game was never localized. So, yeah. The fan translation of this game seems pretty reliable, and I was able to understand it. There were some terms or words that seemed kinda strange for these characters in the game supposed to say when they're based on a medieval setting, but overall, still decent. The soundtrack is great, being composed by Yuka Shigioka. I probably mispronounced her name, but she's the person who basically does most of the Fire Emblem music in the series. My favorite track in the game is probably the boss music that you hear at the end of Chapter 10. Won't say whose theme it is since it's kinda spoiling. And the Dora Destiny theme that plays during Chapter 5. Overall, the presentation of Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy Wars is pretty good, considering it's been released during the SNES era. The visuals are pretty appealing, the story and characters are interesting, and the music still sounds great. All in all, Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy Wars is a game that has aged gracefully over the years in terms of presentation. Now for the gameplay portion of this game. This is going to take a while. Gameplay wise, Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War plays out like most grid-based srpgs, where you control a set amount of unit and move them in the field in order to achieve certain objectives. Well, for this game, one objective, which is seizing multiple enemy castles in a chapter. The game uses a phase-based turn system where you're able to move all your units on your turn, and the enemy are able to move all their units on their turn. Taking account of numerous factors such as movement range, skill, individual stats, weapon power, weapon use, terrain, etc. will be key in determining victory. Okay, now I got the general description out of the way. Let's first talk about the mechanics that this game has that is similar to its successors. Well, the first thing is weapon triangle, which originated in this game. It's basically like a rock paper scissors system where one type of weapon is useful against a certain type, but weak against another. It's pretty well balanced that it gives you an advantage of utilizing the system, but the game isn't really over-reliant on it if your unit got high enough stats to compensate, like getting a Hostia Narga tomes, which will give you significant stat boost. Really big stat boost. Anyway, this game not only has the main weapon trinity, such as lance being sword, sword being axes, and axes being lances, but also has the magic trinity system that is seen introduced in Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, well, reintroduced. Well, it's not exactly the same with Anima being weak to both dark and light, and where dark and light are neutral to each other, but it is similar with how wind can beat thunder, thunder can beat fire, and fire can beat wind. Another thing that this game got is the base Fire Emblem mechanics with the leveling system, which is say that each character got their own unique stack rules when they level up, which will make each character very unique from each other, along with having different classes. And speaking of classes, most of the classes you know in Fire Emblem and the other Fire Emblem games are also in here. You got your paladins, sword masters, heroes, dragon masters, falcon knights, dancers, etc. The one class you don't have is the dark mage, but that sort of makes sense in the story. Albeit some of the classes can do things that is a bit unusual from the norm. What the heck? A dancer can attack? High priest uses anima magic instead of light magic? A Pegasus Knight can heal? Okay, that's not really all that unique since Alincia is able to do it, but you get my drift. But overall, they still work the same way as the other games and give the game a good amount of depth to it, since each class are pretty different from each other in terms of how they function and their stats. And another base Fire Emblem mechanic that this game has is permanent death, which means that if your character HP reaches a 0, you have no way of bringing them back. No Phoenix Downs, nothing like that. So you have to be doubly careful with how you position your troops, which adds a good amount of strategy to the game, like all Fire Emblem games. Okay, this is not exactly 100% true, as you do have the Valkyrie staff, which brings back one unit from the dead. But more than likely, you're only using that once, since it costs a lot of gold in order to repair it. The next mechanic I'm going to go into is probably the mechanic I forgot to mention in my other Fire Emblem reviews, which is weapon use. Each weapon you get in the game, and in any Fire Emblem game, got their own unique set of stats, such as might, weapon weight, etc. Taking advantage of individual weapons you come across will be key to victory. Along with the stats of each weapon comes weapon use. Each weapon got a limited use. If you go beyond that limit, the weapon break. This gives you a good amount of depth, as you have to figure out what kind of weapon you should be using and what kind of weapon you need to conserve. Though in this game, weapon breaking, the thing you'll be least worried about, even though Fire Emblem Genealogy or Holy War has really limited weapons. But it's the least thing you're worried about because of how the forge works in this game. But I go to that later when I'm talking about mechanics that are pretty unique to this game. The next thing I go into is Leadership Stars, which was reintroduced in Fire Emblem Red Dawn, which I also forget to mention in that review. It basically works like a support convo bonus where certain units, like Sigrid and his son, has Leadership Stars, and if they're near units, the unit get bonuses. The higher the stars, the more bonuses you get. But the differences between the support convo and Leadership Star is that Leadership Stars affect every unit that's in range, which is about 2 or 3 spaces apart, I think. While support convo is really between unique individuals. This also applies to enemy units, which adds depth to the game. And speaking of support convo, it's basically in this game, but in the form of the lover system. In fact, the support convo origin, like the weapon triangle, is in this game. Anyway, if you got 2 characters that are lovers, such as Quan or Ethan at the start, they get stat boosts if they're near each other. Not only that, they can occasionally get critical attacks, which is very useful. The lover system overall probably got the best system of support convo in terms of bonuses in the series. The system is also shared by siblings as well, like with Ethan and Sigrid. In order to get characters to be lovers, you basically need to get them to be beside each other in adjacent squares, like how support convo works in the later games. But unlike the other games, you don't really get indication that they're lovers until you check their stats. Overall, the system is pretty good, and it is good to see the origin of support convo in the series. And the system gives birth to the generation system, which is a great system in Genealogy, which I go into later, since this is a feature pretty unique to Genealogy. Okay, Awakening now has a generation system, but before Awakening, it was pretty much unique to Genealogy, so I'm counting it as a unique feature to this game, since it hasn't been in any other game besides that game, while other mechanics like the skill system has been in 4 games, which is this game, Tharsia, Path of Radiance, and Reign of Dawn. And speaking of the skill system, that's the next thing I'm talking about. Like both support combo weapon triangle, the skill system first appearance is in Fire Emblem Genealogy The Holy Wars. Yeah, this game put out a good amount of features that either became stables or is reintroduced in the later games. The skill system basically works the same way as Path of Radiance, well, more or less. Anyway, like Path of Radiance, every character got their own unique set of skills which will affect them in battle when certain conditions are met, such as activating Wrath when your unit HP is half, or activating Astra, which will allow your unit to be able to attack 5 times in one turn. Overall, the skill system works around more or less like Path of Radiance, though skills is probably more prominent in this game as compared to Path of Radiance. And the skill system also has a major effect on the generation system, well, in terms of the second gen children. Another feature that's pretty traditional of Fire Emblem is the linear progression system that Fire Emblem games usually have, which is basically a system which really prohibits grinding, which is a system that got pretty good amount of depth to it, since you have to come up with short-term strategy with how you have to overcome the current map, also long-term strategy with how you have to figure out which character you need to level up in order to beat the overall game. And that's all the major mechanics that this game shares with other games. There are a lot of mechanics in this particular game that either became staples in the series, like the weapon triangle or support convo, or reintroduced into later iterations, like the skill system and the generation system to an extent in Awakening. But just as there are many mechanics that are similar to the other games, there are also lots of things in the gameplay department that are also pretty different from the other games. Firstly, the one feature you probably noticed from the get-go, the maps are huge! Oh man, are they huge. If I were to make a comparison in regards to how big they are, if Skyrim, yes, Elder Scrolls Skyrim, overall areas was converted to a grid-based srpg, you basically have Genealogy of the Holy Wars. Yes, they're that huge. Not only that, how enemy unit move is also different from other games in the series, as they're not positioned in a set location like the other games, and instead are traveling to you from the castle that they're positioned at, and are charging to your castle in order to engage your units. Well, either that or they have a formation near the castle that they're guarding, which can be a bit tricky to find out how to tackle, but then again, that adds tons of fun to this game, trying to figure out how to break through that formation. Both the size of the map and how enemy unit move really stimulates how big the battles can get in a war, along with helping the story considerably. Oh, and the castle system also helps with the feeling of how big the game could get, with how you have to capture multiple castles in order to progress the game, along with defending the captured castles against enemy attacks. The huge group of enemies and map size also requires you to be prepared to get swarmed by the onslaught of enemies, which can require you to have a different mindset compared to other games, well, with just how many enemies will attack you at once. But overall, the scale of the battle in this game really makes the game tons of fun to play through. And there's also a save feature, so the battles don't get too overwhelming to you. Though I would suggest you have multiple save files when you're going through the chapter, as you don't really have a way to redo a chapter prior to saving. Next thing I go into is the generation system, which is a prominent feature in this game, which is connected to the lover system. As I said about the story, you play as Sigurd's son in the second half of the game, but this isn't just limited to Sigurd's son. You're able to play as the children of your other party members as well. Basically, if your party members are lovers, they will have a son or daughter that will inherit their weapons, skills, and stat growth of their parents. Not sure how these things are determined, but you can probably find out at Sirus. And if you didn't pair a character up, you still get replacement characters, which won't be as good as the characters you get through the lover system, but still be able to beat the game. Hopefully. I never actually tried it. Overall, the generation system is great. It got a good amount of depth to it, and can be extremely fun and satisfying seeing your work and pairing certain characters in the first gen pay off in the second gen and having an awesome unit. And there is good amount of way to pair up your units, which can make for good replay value. Next thing I'll talk about is how promotion works in this game. What does promoting a unit do? Well, it significantly increases your unit stats and also let your unit have various other abilities, such as your unit learning able to use more weapons or the unit being mounted. Anyway, promoting a unit is similar to the other Fire Emblem games in that once you reach your unit to level 20, you're able to promote your unit to next class. But it's also pretty different with how there's really no level limit for a class, Well, there is a level limit, which is 30, but the level is not limited by class, but by character. Like for example, if you promote your unit at level 20, promote your unit there, you still have 10 levels to go even if you don't promote. So yeah, promoting also doesn't cost items like in other games. You just need to be at level 20 and be at your home base. Overall, I like the promotion system in Genealogy or Holy Wars, well, as much as the other promotion system in the series. It gives a good sense of progression, and the unit class level ups are pretty significant. Next thing I go into, which is pretty different, is how the arena works. Firstly, it doesn't cost money to enter an arena battle. Secondly, the arena doesn't have randomly selected enemy units, which means you can prepare for them if you know who's coming up. Since the arena opponent for one character is basically the same as another unit, unless the unit is like a bow user, like Midar. And it also means there are a limit to how many arena fights you can get per unit, the limit being 7. Thirdly, your unit don't die if their HP reaches 0. And lastly, you can stop a battle and swap a weapon and get back into the battle. And those are all the differences with the arena. Overall, I like it. It's a tad different from an arena in the other games, but it's a good way to level up and get gold. And it isn't as stress inducing like the other arena battles, such as the Myrmidon or Swordmaster that get silver weapons that critical you and you lose all your progress in the arena battle. That happened to me. Moving on. Okay, last thing I'll talk about is how weapons are handled in this game and weapon repair. In this Fire Emblem game, you have rather limited weapons compared to other games. Granted, other games got limited weapon use, but in this game, it's even more limited as you have a limit to the number of weapons you can actually get. In the other Fire Emblem games, you had weapon use, but you could buy a type of weapons in a shop as many times as you want if you had the money. Like you could buy 5 iron swords in a shop if you had the money and inventory space. Not so much in this game as weapons are more limited. You can only buy 1 silver sword and 1 silver lance. Once you buy them, they're gone. But despite how limited weapon you can get, this game is probably the most lenient on weapon breaking since you're able to repair them with gold. Even if your weapon uses go to 0, the weapon doesn't disappear. You're able to repair it next time you go to the shops in the castle. All in all, the weapon being rather limited is somewhat balanced with how easy it is to repair your weapons. And that's all the differences that Genealogy or the Holy War got compared to the other games. Well, there are other small differences like how bandit attack towns, how critical rate works in this game, etc. But I will be here forever if I try to explain all of it. Overall, the gameplay mechanics that are both familiar and different in this game are great and have aged well. It's really nice to see the origin of the weapon triangle with support convo and skill system, and the system still works and is tons of fun to play to this day. The epic and grand scale of the battle in this game is also awesome to play through. Genealogy of the Holy Wars probably has the largest battles in the series, and there is tons of depth in the srpg battle mechanics and leveling systems. But still, there are some things that have aged well. Firstly, as much as I give credit to how epic and grand Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War is, the game can sometimes be too big, to the point where your characters will be going across a big plain of nothing, and there won't really be much happening. And to add, your foot units can have a hard time catching up to your mounted units in this game. Well, it's a more problem in this game than compared to other games. The second thing is battle calculations. Yeah, you have to do battle calculations of your own, which can be a bit of a pain, determining attack speed. Though it's pretty easy to figure out who can double in this game since you need a particular skill to double, the pursuit skill. That and you need a higher attack speed, which you can calculate by minusing the weapon weight for the weapon you're currently carrying from your speed. Another thing that hasn't really aged well is how inventory is handled in this game. Basically, you can't trade items. You have to go to the shop in the castle, go to the pawn shop, sell the item you want to trade, then go to another character, buy that item from the pawn shop, then you get the item. It's really time consuming. The last thing I would say, which can get a bit annoying, is that the enemy got an unfair advantage with both having unbreakable weapons, which usually isn't a problem with enemies with normal weapons, with long range tomes like Fenrir or sleep staffs. It's very annoying. and your enemy getting to use their ranged weapon automatically if they get attacked by a ranged attacker, even if they use a melee weapon on their turn. But overall, the game is tons of fun, even with some of the things not aging well. Difficulty wise, I say it's a bit hard at first, with how much more enemy this game throws at you compared to the other games, but it's pretty manageable as you go through the game, though there are difficulty spikes with some of the bosses that have legendary weapons. Or the 3 Pegasus sisters in the final chapter. Man, were they difficult to take down. Likewise, the game has 11 chapters, but the chapter is so big that it can be adequately be said that one chapter of Genealogy is like 4 or 5 chapters in the other Fire Emblem games. So I would say the length is around the same as the other games. As for the number, I'm not really sure since the game doesn't really keep track of the time for you, so I just hazard a guess and say 40 to 45 hours. Overall, Fire Emblem, Genealogy of Holy Wars have aged well, and is still a blast to play through. Overall, Fire Emblem Genealogy of Holy War is probably an example of how a game can age elegantly through the years. The visuals are still nice to look at with the 2D sprites and backdrops during battle animations. The story and characters are interesting and compelling, and is really immersive with how the game explains the story through the gameplay in terms of the huge maps and how the enemy general maneuver the troops. The music is great. The srpg battle mechanics is great, both having familiar mechanics that originated in this game, such as weapon triangle and support convo, while also having a few of its own unique mechanics that makes it pretty different from the other games in the series. There are some things that haven't aged well, such as the character not being as fleshed out as the later games, the support convo system, the map being too large at times, enemy having an unfair advantage, etc. But overall, I can really see why Fire Emblem Genealogy of Holy War is so highly regarded by the Fire Emblem fans. Well, by the fans who played the Japanese games. And personally, it's probably one of my favorite Fire Emblem games now. Anyway, onward to my personal score thing. I won't be doing a personal score for this retro review since I didn't really play it when it was released. I couldn't have. It was never released outside Japan. But what I'm going to do, and for reviews similar to this, which are retro reviews, if I do continue retro reviews, is that I'm going to say if it has aged well or it hasn't aged well, and if I recommend it or not, even if it does age well. Anyway, Fire Emblem Genealogy of Holy War gets my seal of recommendation, with both aging really well and still tons of fun to play through to this day. And I totally recommend Fire Emblem fans to give Genealogy of Holy Wars a try out.